No. Well, I mean, I either figured A, they were going to talk to anybody, so let's just do it over it, or something.
So it's
afterwards thing or like a right now thing?
So, yeah. Yeah.
Whatever. I mean,
I think that's
we can officially ask it at the sidewalk.
going through so many, that and the counties.
I picked some up today.
It doesn't say that Amy,
I looked at the minutes.
that try to regulate an activity based on
Amy suggested we don't do that yes and no
one
X's.
a perception of the character of the person or people that are there.
All right,
I mean, I'm not
here we go.
All clear what she said.
Yeah, I think, no, I thought I even,
Doing this on the site.
Jessica, and she said, yes.
Yeah.
And she agreed,
1,
right?
2, 3, 4. Making sure we have audio.
Because so much of it is subjective based on the big, the perceived behavior of people.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Whenever you're ready.
Do we have audio? Not quite.
Okay.
Need to confirm audio on Town Hall streams.
NASA in there.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
He's probably putting out fake news.
Oh, did you want that? Let's see if Lisa gave you one.
Do we, do we just have this thing and,
Yeah,
that's it?
that's not much, yeah. Yeah.
We're on the air.
Okay, good. As in to start?
As in to start.
Thank you. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the regular scheduled planning board meeting in the town of Kennebunkport, April 4th, 2018. We have a full board in attendance this evening. We will move on to approval of the prior meeting minutes. Has everybody received a copy of the minutes, had a chance to review them? Any questions or concerns?
I got mine late this afternoon and haven't looked at them.
Okay.
So I'm looking at them right now.
You are?
Fine. Right.
There are some typos, but that's all.
Otherwise, okay.
No problem.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstained?
Yeah, I just got them.
Fair enough.
Notice Mr. Doe, D-O, I thought that was cute. Doe, like,
Yeah.
I thought the recording secretary did an outstanding job. To keep up
That
with
was a
those
hefty task.
yes, it
Yes.
was a hefty task, that's for sure.
3 or so hours worth, if not a little bit more. Before I jump into the agenda, I would like to just make note that on Saturday, April the 7th, 2018 at 9 a.m., there will be a public site walk for Binnacle Hill Subdivision Phase 2. Participants will meet at the end of Henchy Way and go from there. The public is welcome to attend. It is an undeveloped site, and it is, I'm guessing it's mud season, so dress accordingly. So we have 3 items on the agenda this evening. The first is 180102. It's Deborah Pierce and Bruce Donath. Alan Shepard is the authorized agent. It's a site plan review. It's the findings of fact for approval to expand the use of the non-conforming single-family dwelling from seasonal into year-round by installing insulation and a heating system. The address is 25 Pier Road. It's identified as Assessor's Tax Map 30, Block 1, Lot 17, in the Cape Porpoise East, Shoreland, and Resource Protection Zones. I understand that Mr. Shepard's not here tonight, so you are the case manager,
I
Mr.
am
Bowe?
indeed. Okay, findings of fact. Kennebunk Planning Board finding of facts and decision, application of Deborah M. Pierce and Ruth Donath, Post Office Box 7115, Cape Porpoise, Maine, to expand the use of the property at 25 Pier Road by converting the dwelling from seasonal to year-round. Following a site plan review pursuant to the Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinance and a public hearing held on March 21st, 2018, the Kennebunk Planning Board makes the following findings of facts and conclusions, renders the following decision subject to the conditions enumerated below. Finding of facts are as follows. 1. Property is located at Cape Porpoise East, our resource protection and shoreland zones. 2. Property has a street address of 25 Pier Road, Kennebunkport, Maine. Applicants and owners of the property are Deborah M. Pierce and Bruce R. Donath, Post Office Box 7115, Cape Porpoise. Applicant is represented by Alan E. Shepherd of Shepherd and Reed, 93 Main Street, Kennebunk. Property is identified as map 30, block 1, lot 17 on the municipal assessor's map. Owner has demonstrated a legal interest in the property by providing a copy of the warranty deed recorded in the York County Registry of Deeds, book 3121, page 262 to 263, dated October 27th, 1981. Premises are comprised of 0.09 acres of land, more or less. Property is legally non-conforming under the current Kennebunkport land use ordinance. The lot and structures are non-conforming since the lot is much less than 40,000 square feet required for residents in either resource protection or shoreland zones. Structure also fails to meet the setback requirements of 4.17a. In an application dated January 25th, 2018, the applicant proposes to winterize the property in order to expand the use of the property in accordance with the land use ordinance 8.8a from seasonal to year-round, while making no changes to the exterior of the house. 10. The applicant is seeking to waive the requirement of 10.6c for surveyed plan of the property. The board accepts the GIS survey map as a substitute. 11. Pursuant to the requirements of 1010A of the Land Use Ordinance Guidelines for Decision, Planning Board shall approve site plan application unless it makes a negative ruling on one or more of the following findings which would otherwise compel denial. And we have nothing that was they're all either fine or not applicable. Part 12, when a proposed development will be located within shoreline or resource protection, in addition to the requirements of Article 10, townwide regulations in Article 6 and performance standards for specific activities and land uses in Article 7. Approval of the site plan also requires that the board make positive findings based on information as presented as the board finds that the site plan will not have safe and harmful conditions, and there's a collection of other points. And any negative finding by the board means that the application has been denied. 13, the application is otherwise complete. Conclusions. Article 1010A of the Land Use Ordinance mandates the planning board shall approve a site plan unless it makes one or more identified findings that would otherwise compel denial. As noted above, the board makes no such findings. Site plan application is hereby approved. Conditions of approval, if any, pursuant to Articles 10.11 and 10.12e. The applicant, pursuant to 10.12e, shall notify planning board prior to any transfer of lights to construct an approved project. No assignment or transfer of rights to construct an approved project is valid without prior review and approval of the planning board. Of a new performance guarantee to ensure that the assignee or transferee has financial capacity to undertake or complete the project. Number 2, the applicant must record a copy of this decision and provide proof of such recordation as a copy thereof attested at the Registry of Deeds before any permits may issue or any construction may commence. 3, the applicant, pursuant to 5.16b, shall have first obtain a seasonal conversion permit from the local plumbing inspector prior to starting the year-round conversion. 4, the applicant will comply with all terms and conditions of the Town of Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinance as well as applicable state and municipal building codes in accordance with all relevant federal, state, and local ordinances, acts, and regulations. Dated April 4th, 2018, Kennebunkport Planning Board.
Thank you. Any questions or concerns, thoughts?
Just wanted to bring up one point of clarification regarding the seasonal conversion permit piece. So when you look at what that specifically describes, the seasonal conversion permit is a permit that is, that's issued by the licensed plumbing inspector and is specific to situations when you're dealing with a septic system. So, in other words, it's a subsurface waste issue. So in most cases, in, these types of scenarios, you're going from, something that may have a holding tank to an actual legitimate septic system. So where this property is, been hooked up to municipal sewer, there's no, there's no seasonal conversion permit that's going to be required. I mean, I'm happy to put something in a record for that, but, there's nothing that would physically change, nor is there really a category to put this in since it's hooked up to sewer.
Okay.
So, the only problem is I just quoted exactly we can line it out, but
Yeah. I'm happy to put together a memo that'll go in the file just to satisfy that as a requirement.
Okay.
But
That's easier.
just to give the board, the background
we-
for
okay.
that.
It's hooked up to public.
That's right.
all right.
Yep.
So,
Is it fair to say that, Werner, you are the licensed plumbing
I am,
inspector?
yes.
So I think that satisfies your need, Tom.
yeah,
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
All those in favor? Opposed? We'll sign those. While we're passing around signatures, I will tee up the next agenda item. It's case number 180202, Seaside Hotel Associates, the DBA, the Nonantum Resort. It's a site plan review. It's a continued review for approval to tear down an existing garage and storage building, replace with a new storage building, and clean up the parking plan. It's 95 Ocean Avenue, identified as Assessor's Tax Map 8, Block 001, Lot 13 in the Riverfront Zone. Hi, Tina.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Wonderful. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming out this evening and for taking the time to review some additional information which you had requested at our meeting just a couple of weeks ago. So when we spoke last, I stood before you asking to consider our proposed application of tearing down an existing garage, existing storage building so that we could replace it with proper storage that was safe and secure, and in doing so also modifying our parking plan so that which is already a non-conforming use. So based on that meeting, we had a great discussion of what other information you would need to see to be able to really take a look at this and have all the information before you. So I submitted some additional documentation with some updated drawings from our engineer that shows the existing building, the lot coverage, et cetera. You had also requested a copy of the new storage building and what that would look like. So in your packet, you do have that information. You had also requested some photos of the existing buildings so that you could take a look at the condition that they're in. And as everybody may have recognized, they're both pretty deplorable. So I think those go without saying, but we're certainly glad to go over those with you. We also I had neglected to include a list of abutters that were notified, so I did include that updated list. And then there was also a letter that was issued back in 1995 from Livingston and Hughes indicating all of the parking that exists. And so included with that also was a diagram of what the existing parking is like right now on paper and what the proposed modification would look like. The last request, based on sort of a census from the board, was to ask the engineer to go forward with a stormwater drain report, which, stormwater management plan, I'm sorry, which has been provided to you. I believe there were some copies dropped off at the town hall as well as emailed.
Wonderful.
Great. Questions?
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You sure?
You go ahead.
Okay. Yes, maybe someone can explain the site plan here. Your data for the village residential zone, the lot, says that there's, I think, 4% coverage. But when I look at it, it looks like there's like more than half of it is covered. I
Okay.
don't get that.
So I'm going to introduce Jeff. He works with civil engineering, and he was the mastermind behind this whole drawing. Give him a reputation to live up to.
Sure. My name's Jeff Oliva. I'm with Civil Consultants. And I think where the confusion is if you look at the way the zoning ordinance is written, is that there's a difference in how you calculate lot coverage if you're in the village residential or if you're in the shoreland area. In the shoreland area, the lot coverage includes everything that is impervious. So gravel, pavement, buildings, items like that. In the other zone, it is just the building area. So that's why you see that difference of you look at, it says, you know, in the village residential, it's 4.5%. But the way the ordinance is written, the pavement in that section is not considered lot coverage.
Okay.
And so that's why there's a difference. And that's why if you go in that table too, if you look at what we tried to do to match the existing coverage in the shoreland zone with what our proposed coverage.
Thank you. And my other concern was there is an increase with the new proposal, which goes against a non-conforming lot, 4.5 to 6.6%.
Yep, and I think if we look at what that is the small increase in size is the section of the proposed garage area. That's really the difference, because if we look at what's in existing condition and the proposed is that garage area in that side.
Do you have questions, Tom?
A couple, yeah. First off, where I see right now, if you walk past there, which I do most days, this area down where it says proposed retaining wall and has down at the bottom there, from just adjacent to Ocean Ave, going all the way down, there's, right in there.
Yep.
Okay, all of that is grass, and all of that has a sign, parking for Nonantum on it. They're all labeled as parking spaces, even though here they're not.
On the existing conditions
The
plan?
existing, no, when I walk past it,
Okay.
I see a
Yeah.
sign that says parking for Nonantum right over this grassy area that I see.
Yeah, you see it on, not on this plan, but you see it on the other sheet that has the existing conditions plan. That sheet L2 would be as it exists now. And I think
Okay, it
I think
doesn't
you
show
do-
it
I
as
think
parking
there
there
are-
either. It shows it as,
Yeah. I think you can explain how people park during the summertime.
okay.
Yes. So are you referring to the area that if you're if you're standing with your back to the Nonantum, the parking lot is in front of you and there's a grassy area over to the right-hand side there?
Yep, going all, I mean, one of the signs is actually on a telephone pole.
Correct. And that's obviously meant for all of that, those signage is to indicate that the parking there is for the Nonantum. I had my winter office in the front porch area, which is a glass enclosed area, and it was shocking to me how many people park in our parking lot, even at this time of the year, and walk to the beach or walk into town. And in the summertime, I'm sure if we monitor it even closely, it'd be a little bit more alarming.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, but that area that really isn't parking is now labeled such, is what I'm saying.
I believe it is utilized that way.
Okay. All right, I guess. The other thing, on your initial page of of the site plan review request. Obviously, there are changes to all of these things that are labeled no change. So this needs to get updated.
Correct. So that's a point of question for me. Would you want a brand-new application submitted or just a modification to the existing?
I believe a modification is adequate.
Yeah, I think that's up to the board, but,
Yeah.
it sounds like just an
Just a
update on the
modification,
page.
I mean, probably just the 4 points on this page
Yep.
would just want to be updated.
Okay.
Because I'm sure you have the
Because the
numbers
information's,
now.
could the information that you're referring to is the information that's
It's
listed
on the drawing,
okay.
actually. Yeah.
So just so that it's a clear
Yeah,
one
just
page.
to have a nice little one-page thing, yeah. That's it for me.
So the area Tom had referenced, if I'm not mistaken, do most of the people park from, like, just they pull up from Ocean Avenue?
Yeah.
Or, right? And so the proposal here would be that a retaining wall with some landscaping, looks like trees or shrubs, would kind of stop that from occurring, and then parking would actually come through the parking lot up to a spot, a parking space.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you're right. If we look at what that old parking plan that was there, I think, yeah, people do park on the grass. That was never intended to do. And I think with this plan here, is you're right, the intent is to get everybody to come in one consistent same spot into that parking lot. And then they'd gain access to there, and then with vegetation and landscaping, block that area off. And the same goes with the proposed existing spaces that are perpendicular to Ocean Ave.
Yeah.
If you see on the plan here, I think there was some discussion, we've added some seasonal wheel stops on there.
Yeah.
To be able to stop people from being able to pull right into Ocean Ave and have to use the parking lot and use the main entrance as the means of egress to help address some safety issues with that part of the project.
So no loop there, it's actually entrance and exit would be the side closest to town.
Correct.
Right.
A couple of questions. The catch basins you show there are 3 of them? Or 2 of them?
Yeah, we have several catch basins that will be in the new pavement area, and that's to direct the flow. We have, up on this area here, we have a catch basin that would be in the middle of the grass, that's gonna direct water into our underground storage system. And then discharge the water out of our underground storage into a level spreader to create more of a sheet flow off-site. And down on this other parking lot where we're raising the grade, have another catch basin to capture that water. And that water is also discharged out of the pipe through a stone level spreader to help spread out the flow so there's not an erosion or potential for a channelization.
Yeah, that goes in towards the marsh, right?
They both do, yes, yeah, as it currently does. As you can picture the site, that's kind of the high point up at the top by the house, and the water breaks in 3 different directions. And we modeled the same scenario with our new design to try to capture the flow and hold it back as best we can, and to meet the pre-existing conditions.
All right. In winter, do you plow that at all?
Up on the hill?
Yeah.
Well, this year we had to because of the house that's up there, and we do tend to make a sweep right through just in case there was ever any emergency
Do
of
you,
that house.
do you use salt at all or anything on it? Are you planning to? Okay, I was just worried about discharges into the marsh and where it's going. The other thing you say is this is a flood area zone, hazard zone. And when I look at the GIS maps, it's out of the flood
Yeah,
zone.
it's out
Yeah.
of the flood zone.
It's outside
Yeah.
the flood zone.
Yeah.
Okay, so it really shouldn't say that.
Yeah, and then also just to go back to your question about salt and sediment, our catch basins, they all have a sump to be able to catch the sediment there. But we also, on the outlets, we have a hood to be able to trap any kind of oils or that would be floatants on that water that's in the catch basin to help. And we have a maintenance plan also that talks about what their responsibility is to make sure for cleaning during the year.
I saw the maintenance plan, but oftentimes the people who do the maintenance don't see the maintenance plan.
Exactly, yep.
And that becomes a problem. What was the other thing I wanted to ask?
So just to clarify, I'll clarify a little bit that note regarding the floodplain, because it is noted that it's located in I believe in an X zone. So if you were to have a discussion with FEMA would say that the entire United States is in a floodplain. But they place classifications on the level of risk that's associated with it. And so, an X zone under the current maps is that area with the least amount of risk. But that would be the line that you would hear,
Okay.
regarding the designation of flood zones.
Okay, that's my thing. The other thing is, if you plow the snow and so forth, oftentimes the people who plow up into the tree and planting area, which is kind of hazardous for the trees. When it goes up against the bark, I'm wondering where you're planning to put the snow, since you have so much parking area.
I can show that on the plan, but with the discussions that we had is that since this is, since the hotel closes down during the wintertime and there's really nobody using the house in that area, is that the plow would come around and do the main areas just to keep an opening for fire access. And then if they have to push snow, they'll push it into these areas where the spaces are, where there's not gonna be any use during the wintertime. So the snow storage is really in the parking spaces that are not utilized during the winter.
Okay.
Other questions?
Can I just ask about the notes on L1 that say, this plan is intended to show potential parking layout for redevelopment. Parking is to be utilized by hotel employees. That seems different than what we've been discussing.
Well, yeah, I think I need to modify that note from the beginning, and really it's, I guess the thought process here is that, yes, there will be a guest that could use the spaces up along Ocean Ave like they have, but majority would be for employees up on the top of the hill, unless I'm wrong on that. But that's when we talked about it, so I need to update that note to be more accurate. I think it was something I missed that was a carryover from when we first started doing concepts and thinking about the project. But you're right, there will be a mix of guests and employees that park up here.
We talked last time about what was in the previously approved plan, and I believe what was in there we talked about was 42 spaces, 14 of which were for employees, 28 were for general. Do you feel that you're increasing the number of parking spaces for general or for employees?
It would be for employees.
I see, okay.
The more services we offer, the more employees we tend to have.
That's a good thing.
Yes, it is a good thing. We'll have,
The
we'll
sec-
have designated spots for our employees, and all of their cars are gonna have parking tags so that we can identify who's parking where.
No, thanks, that's just what I was interested in. And the note after that says, maintain existing tree cover where possible. So I live up the block from Tom, and I walk by as well.
Well, when we first started talking about this plan, my first conversation with Jeff and John was that although we need to clean up this parking, we want to have as much green space up there as possible, because it really is, if you look over there now, it's an eyesore. And so, but there are some really beautiful tree combinations and tree plantings that exist. And that's a really important factor for us to continue, so that the overall look of the parcel is pretty, because right now it's not.
I didn't get an exact count, but there's like 10 or 12 big trees, big by being a foot or larger in diameter, that are along, almost in a row. They're a mix of large pines and others. do you expect that all of those are going to be taken out and replaced by some specimen trees that you'll be reintroducing?
I'd have to defer to Jeff because I know we had talked about the different species that would be there. There are some very large, tall scrub pines there. We
Yes.
did have some taken down in the fall, and actually some fell down. I think we
Some
talked
that were
about this.
damaged.
Some, well, and they actually fell in that big windstorm on cars at the end of October. So the trees, some of the trees that are there will remain, and the others would be replaced with appropriate trees that would be indigenous to the area.
It just looked like the area where the trees are is largely going to be paved. If I was just eyeballing this plan, and I couldn't really put that together, whether you were proposing to retain certain of those trees.
I don't have a count, but what I would say to you is that is a very important component to this plan for us, obviously for an aesthetic standpoint, but also for
Understand.
the overall appearance aesthetically, but as well as having it absorb some of the water as well.
Thank you. The only other comment I'll make is that, again, as a new guy, this confused me in that at first I looked at this as an application for a change to this specific property. And yet, the parking plan, the historical one, was approved for the Nonantum for 2 properties. And the changes that you're showing here are for both properties. You're showing debiting 19 parking spaces on the port side and adding 19 spaces on this property for which the application is written.
Well, I think that's
It's a bit confusing.
Well, and I would absolutely agree with you, and I think that's where some of the confusions of this entire application probably lies. I'd spent quite a bit of time going back through all of the records in Town Hall to try and see were these two pieces of these 2 parcels ever treated as separate entities when it comes to talking in regards to parking. And in fact, no, they never have been. They've always been considered one unit. And so when the Nonantum was built and when Portside was built and the staff house was there, the total number of parking spaces and the marina, the restaurant, et cetera, the total number of spaces at one time were 243.
Right.
And, through time, things have changed and the numbers come down, and the official number, the last plan that you have shows 225 spaces. We made some additional modifications a few years back to our restaurant, reducing it down to 222 spaces. And so I think the confusion will lie with the fact that we're asking you to approve a modification to a non-conforming use. But we are not able to really take in factor the other side of the road where all of these parking spaces still lie. So I would agree with you, but as history would show, from a parking standpoint anyway, they've always been treated as one property.
No, I agree. I spent an hour pouring through the records up there as well, and it's
Interesting, isn't it?
it's very clear that parking is not a new issue.
No, it's
for the Nonantum.
definitely been a common thread over there. And so that's also, why we're here to talk to you about it, to say, we realize it's a problem, and we want to come up with a solution that's going to obviously meet whatever requirements we have to abide by, but also to make it safer.
I made a comment last time that you were here that just on first read, I was struggling with the thought of taking this lot and saying we were going to take a non-conforming use, that is, using it as parking, and increase the number of spaces from 42 to 61.
Mm-hmm.
I went up there to convince myself, as I did, that really the parking plan as approved was one that spans both properties, and I think we do need to look at it in that light and somehow be able to justify this as not an increase in parking, but a redistribution of it, and looking at going from a non-conforming use to still be in a non-conforming use, but not one that is worse, one that is better in any number of aspects. certainly the safety aspect here we're talking about, the changing of the dilapidated structures. Are we really, we're better off for that?
I would agree, but if we were to do that, we would have to take the 1995 Planning Board decision seriously. And obviously, we're not. They required so many parking spots for the port side. They were drawn out on paper, but they were never constructed. They were never used. So this idea of debiting doesn't really make sense to me in that regard.
I'm not sure I follow. They're not used, they don't park over there?
No,
Not in that particular.
it's all grass. It's down by the swimming pool.
So you don't have 225 spaces, really?
Well, if you look at the information that was sent over with that letter from Livingston Hughes, it definitely clearly marks out the point where there's paved and painted parking spaces, there's paved and unpainted parking spaces, and there's grass unimproved parking spaces. And so I think what Mark is referring to is the grass unimproved parking spaces. So those were intended to be used if all the other parking was utilized.
And are they in fact used when
We have.
all of the other parking is utilized?
We have when necessary, but we've been able to manage the parking the best we can to eliminate that. It's not ideal to have cars on that back lawn.
It's like overflow parking,
Correct.
yeah. But if that's real, Mark, I'm not sure I have a problem with it. And just for full disclosure here, I'm not going to be voting on this. I'm a alternate on it, but I am very interested in, like I say, I think I'm coming to the conclusion that this is a net for the good.
I would tend to agree with you,
Yeah,
but.
obviously. I'm not shocked, but. That's all I had.
Thank you, Ed. Neil? No?
I have one more. Sure. Just a comment that if you're going to put in trees, you might talk to the tree warden about what the town might like to see.
Species.
And the
Certainly.
species that would be best for the area.
Okay.
And the other thing is you might talk to him about easements between private property owners and the town in terms of maintenance of those trees,
Okay,
pruning and so forth.
thank you.
Any other questions, Scott, Mark? I missed, I think I was gone for this first meeting.
Yes.
Has there been a case manager assigned?
No.
Oh,
Well, we weren't sure when they come back.
okay.
They've done a tremendous amount of extra work since that first meeting.
Okay. Excuse me. Are you volunteering?
I'll do it. I'll do it.
You'll do it, thank you, Mark.
I think what we have to do, though, is approve that the application is complete first,
Yeah,
before we go on.
before, and then we have the public hearing next time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I'm understanding some of the questions or feedback, we'd like to see an amendment to the application.
Right, but all of the information is here.
Is contained within the plans.
In the application,
Yep.
it's just we'd like to see it.
Okay, certainly.
So I think the application is complete, although I have preference to see these things filled out correctly
Yeah.
on the form.
Yeah.
Do we have an authorization letter? Do we need one? I didn't see one in my packet, so just,
The
For me,
applicant is
for me to
representing
represent,
herself.
there's one on file in town hall.
there is? Okay.
I was gonna say, it's usually always you.
Yeah.
Well, she's representing the seaside.
Yes. It almost sounded like a motion, Tom.
Okay, so moved. I'd like to make a motion that that this is a complete application.
And the amendment will be, you'll update.
Yes,
okay?
absolutely.
Second, Scott? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. So, a public hearing, April
18th?
18, does that sound right?
Fantastic.
The
Thank
next-
you.
The next
Should
meeting.
be.
Okay,
Today's the
great.
4th.
Thank you very much.
If I can suggest one item, is that, you know, maybe prior to the public hearing, and maybe Jeff, this is something that, you know, that you would take on, but would be to have a conversation and get a more formal approval from Mike Claus, Public Works, specifically since, you know, we're dealing with some changes for items that are in the public right of way.
I had a conversation with him. What would you like to see Warner do?
Letter
Because I've already talked to him about this.
Just where we're dealing with the temporary, you know, with the temporary bumps,
Okay.
you know, with the temporary stops over
Okay.
there. Just want to know that there's an acknowledgement that, you know, that the town is fine with that as a, you know, as a measure.
Werner, where there is town sewer in that right-of-way, down in the front, a catch basin, I think it's called,
Storm drain.
a storm drain, is there some sign-off by Public Works that the changes that are going on with wastewater treatment are okay with them, or is this benign in that regard?
Yeah.
I'll talk to Mike at Public Works to talk about that catch basin that's out there for stormwater. I think there's some maintenance that needs to happen to it.
I saw those disparaging remarks.
And I'll get some, probably try to get him to issue a letter or an email or something like that.
That'd be
That
great.
talks about the seasonal wheel stops.
Right, yeah, just something that acknowledges,
Yeah.
you know, that he's fine with them
Yeah.
going in at a certain date and when they need to be removed by, and, you know, something like that that we could include.
Sounds good. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So the last item on this evening's agenda is case number 171201, Sandy Pines Campground, Sebago Technics, authorized agent, site plan reviewed, and this is a continued deliberation, so public hearing has been closed. For approval for facility upgrades and to improve pedestrian and vehicular safety to the operational component of the campground, as well as relocation of campsites and other site work. Its address is 277 Mills Road, Assessor's Tax Map 32, Block 1, Lot 3, in the Goose Rocks Shoreland and Resource Protection Zones. We should also note we have our town attorney present. So at our last meeting, we closed the public hearing, and this board reviewed the land use ordinance, in particular Article 10.10. We went through each one of those, had good discussion, and offered sort of a straw poll vote, if you will, on each one of those items. And Ed, as case manager, was going to pull together a first pass at a findings of fact. And I think the purpose, and correct me if I'm wrong or if there are other opinions, but the purpose of this evening's meeting was for the board to review this draft or first pass at a findings of fact, to continue deliberation, discussion, and I guess, you know, see where that takes us, if it's to a vote this evening, or if there's additional discussion. Am I understanding that right?
I think so. I mean, the main question is, I mean, I think Lisa intended for it to be, you know, already perfect, that we could sign it off, which I don't think it's there.
But Lisa wasn't at the meeting, so
Yeah.
I think that,
She tries.
I think this is a bit unusual, certainly in my experience from the couple of months that I've been here, but we purposely said that this was a draft, and we would use it as a vehicle for making sure that we all agreed with the facts and found them to be the same. So I certainly drafted it, thought I had an action to draft it as a way for us to then go through it and see whether in fact we all are of the same opinion.
Yeah. So with that, I'd like just to open it up to the board for discussions and, did any comments, concerns, but, I guess I'm of the opinion we could kind of go down the line and chat, or, or we can go through it line by line. I'm indifferent. Amy, you might have an opinion. You're sitting up.
I just had a point of order question, and that is, at some point, don't have to do it now, but is every board member who's sitting at the dais going to be voting on this? Do we have some alternates? Just so we know, there certainly can be a robust discussion among all, but it would be
Yeah.
helpful to know who's voting.
If I'm not mistaken, I think you were going to abstain, Mark. So it would
So
be
it'll be Ed.
right down to Ed.
Okay, so from Scott to Ed?
Yes.
Got it.
Okay.
So Neil and Mark will abstain.
Yeah.
Okay.
And wonder, that
Or
sounds good.
not vote. Is there-
Right, and not vote, no, not abstain from discussion, I
Yes.
understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So I would add one other thing in terms of goals, but I had a personal goal that we might come out of here with an understanding as to what the findings of fact should be in the eyes of the board. And even if we didn't have it written here, we would have it clear in all of our minds, and I could produce a final as a
Yes.
result of
Yes.
tonight's meeting. That's
Yeah.
my
That's-
personal goal.
Yeah.
That's consistent.
Well, I want to comment that you put a lot of work into it.
Yeah,
Oh,
It
yeah.
does very well with it.
And I love the new format. I really like this format,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tried doing something on the last one to make them sentences, but this, I think, really worked nicely, where you have the quote, you have
You write it
decision,
out.
and you have comments.
Some comments.
I mean, I
behind
like,
Better than that checklist.
I have to tell you that Microsoft Word, was a real struggle for me with this, and I
Yes.
think it could still use some work.
well, and,
it. Sometimes it.
Microsoft Word is always a struggle.
Run it on a Mac, and then you'll really know what the struggle is like.
I guess the one area that I think we should pay special attention to, well, it's everything, but it's the conditions.
Yes, yeah.
It seemed like through our straw poll vote, and again, from my opinion, in reading through, I think you did a wonderful job, Ed. But I do think that we should discuss the conditions. I would imagine that the applicant might want to talk about certain conditions as well, or, so why don't?
Well, maybe that area we could go through line by line.
Yeah, we probably
I'd be
should.
curious to know, have the board members had an opportunity to read it as it was distributed in
Multiple
advance?
times.
yes.
I had a quick one. In
Distribution of it?
Because it might direct us differently.
in number 8, did we conclude that there's 324 sites?
So that's one of the items that we need to talk about. That's right.
I don't think we ever really concluded that.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
What I tried to write was that we concluded that there is conflicting evidence, and that there is convincing evidence that there are currently 324 sites. We have our code enforcement officer said he looked at the plan that was submitted by the applicant, who walked the site himself and counted them, and I feel pretty good about that, and I'd be interested in what others feel. But that there was still some concern, even though we had an affidavit from Steve, having talked to the family member and all, that said there's been no changes, so it must be that you started with the number you have today. But I thought that there was enough anecdotal evidence that all we could say was it looks substantially to us as that there'd been always over 300.
No. No,
Okay.
and I wouldn't agree with that in number 8.
Okay, so,
I would say the current number is 324.
yep,
But the number of campsites historically has not necessarily exceeded 300. In fact, there is evidence on going back, on way back, that it was much less than that.
So
There is conflicting evidence from the assessor's records and from the internet, basically, that what was advertised by the owners, that there were less than 300 easily.
So I do think that you should have a robust discussion about this point, and the reason why I think that, and you can come to different opinions about this, but the way this draft has been written and the way the board as a whole has been talking about this is that one of the things that makes the proposal here, less non-conforming, is that there has been a reduction in the total number of sites from its historic use, or the historic number of sites. It's gone down, and that has been layered throughout the factual findings here. So it's important, if that's not the case, then I mean, maybe there will be differing opinions, maybe there's a majority sort of sense that, you know, some of you are more comfortable than others about that. But if you are truly, as a board, deciding that historically there were there's compelling evidence that there were fewer sites than 300, then you can't be writing this decision to say this is now less non-conforming because we've gone from, whether it's 324 or maybe you feel more comfortable with the notion that it was in excess of 300. We don't have a precise number. It might not be 324, it might not be 350, it might not be 315, but we're confident, or we can reach some consensus that it was greater than 300, and that would shore up your reasoning that that reduction makes you feel better that the proposal here is less non-conforming. If you don't agree on that, that's fine, but we would need to rework your decision as to what your findings are. So I just want you to be consistent about that as you discuss the number of sites issue, because I heard a lot of discussion about individual planning board members being comforted by the fact that there was an offer to reduce the number of campsites to what historically had been on the site. So, discussion.
I want to say one of the reasons, the main reason that the number 300 was important to me is that it eliminated the nonconformance with regard to the total area per campsite. I thought that the land area devoted to camping, there's significant evidence that that hasn't increased over time.
Well, I think you could take it from the perspective that the number of campsites was only one factor. You know, if you look at the campground ordinance and so forth, it didn't conform in many ways. And I think you could say that there's conflicting evidence, you know, ranging, and you can say a range from, you know, a little over 200 to over, you know, to 324. And from assessor's records and from internet records and from affidavits, it may have even been higher than 324. It may have been, you know, the low number. But for the planning board to come to a decision, one of the, taking all the factors into consideration, okay, settling on 300 with the applicant, with the improvements made to the campsite, and to have it conform to the amount of property around each site and so forth, was one way to decide that this is where it should be at the present, and we should take it from 300 sites. I'm not sure where I'm going with this. Basically, to conclude that, you know, that 300 sites is a reasonable supposition for the number of sites. It brings it into conformance in this way. Adding the safety features helps to reduce traffic and all the other factors that the applicant has been willing to concede makes this a less non-conforming, safer site, reduces some of the numbers of beachgoers, you know, to help the community at large. And this is what we've settled on, basically, to take that as a basis from now on. And I think that's the best decision you can make.
I think we're trying to write something that's tight, though. You know, that follows all together logically. Other than, yeah, this feels better to us.
Well, it's not that it feels better, in one sense, because we had to decide on the basis. We came to the basis of 300. The applicant was willing to reduce the number of sites to at least bring this into conformance with the acreage around each site. Adding to that safety features and everything else, even though it's still a non-conforming use, makes it a better use for the community.
I came at it, I'll just do this one more time. I don't mean to belabor this point, but maybe do a counterexample. If we had ample evidence that this, historically, that there was 250 campsites on this property, and the applicant decided to carve out 10 more, I don't think they would have had to come to the planning board for that. I think that even if they had, it still would have been a non-conforming use as a campground, but it still would be conforming in that it met the total area per campsite. Now, some may argue that increasing 10 sites is increasing its use as a campground. I'm not sure if that's where you're thinking, is that the exact number is important in terms of its non-conforming use as a seasonal campground. But to me, it seems like once you have the size of the property and you've got a grandfathered use as a seasonal campground, and it meets all of the other conditions of a campground, even if it were in the free enterprise zone, then I'm struggling with how we would think that was an expansion of use.
I think it, I think the issue here is that people felt differently about whether or not 324 was the absolute accurate number. And, you know, there was all of that information over the past. I think it's fair to say, although conflicting evidence was reviewed regarding the number of campsites historically on the property, and possibly, you know, with some figures ranging from 200 and blank to 300 and something, that, and with most, you know, a most recent inspection by the town confirming 324 as identified by the applicant, you know, you later point out the reduction to 300, and so maybe it's, you tie it together that, like, it's, well, it's there, I mean, I felt pretty comfortable with it, and Nina didn't, and I think that's, you know, I totally get it.
That's why there's
So it's a matter of, I think, how do you, how can you appropriately state the feelings of the board with
Fair
the
point.
most recent, you know, and maybe show the variation with the number presented in the application and, you know, and I guess confirmed upon sale by our town of 324, but yet now here we are with 300.
We think about Nina and I collaborating on
I'm fine.
taking an input, and then
argue
again,
for the next week or two.
well, I think I'm worried about form here too. We can't,
Yeah.
two of us can maybe go back and work that and then bring back the result to the board.
Yeah, I just, so, yeah, and I.
Or we could do it in real time here.
Would that
I
be
think
legal?
this-
I
yes.
think
So
it'd
is
be
it
helpful
two-
to have you, I'm sorry, Tom.
No, you
No,
said
go-
it. Go ahead.
Well, I am all for collaboration, but I think a little more discussion on what it is that you would be bringing back to the board might be helpful.
Agreed.
But if
I
two
don't
of
know
them
if-
go offline, it's fine, as long as there isn't a third one, correct?
Well, yeah, I think it's okay if the two of them collaborate, but you're right, I don't think we want to have, run into a meeting issue
Yes.
Right.
that
Well,
isn't
it would
properly
help if-
noticed.
It would help if we knew how all the other board members felt about that and the wording.
And it seems like I'm hearing a few different things. I'm hearing, so is there some discussion about what historically has been on the site in terms of number of sites? Is there enough evidence to conclude, A, that 324 was the number historically? And if that's too specific, is there evidence to support that in excess of 300 sites were on the property historically? So not a specific number, but more than 300. So that's another way of looking at it. And then another way that I'm hearing Nina and Ed sort of struggle with is the idea that there's conflicting evidence that was presented. We know there's 324 sites today, or at least we're concluding that the evidence presented did shore up that fact, and the applicant is reducing it to 300 from there. The only issue about doing that is that you're not really tying it to a historical finding.
Yeah, that's what bothers me, is I'd rather tie it to the land use ordinance when it was first approved, you know, the campground ordinance and the land use ordinance, and say that because there was conflicting evidence, we couldn't determine what the basis was, what the number of campsites were, and the acreage around each site, basically, at the time the land use ordinance went in. And we could put a range in there. It ranged from as low as such and such to as high as 400. And talking with the applicants and gathering more evidence that we had to make a decision on a basis. Today they're at 324. The applicant agreed to reduce it to 300 to at least come into conformance with the land use ordinance for the amount of acreage for each site. And we felt that that's a number that that the board felt comfortable with in terms of the non-conforming use.
That seems fair to me.
I would go along with that, but I agree with Nina. I'd like to maybe poll the board and just
Yeah.
go down and say, what does each of us think about
Right.
this
The
specific
one-
paragraph?
The one
and-
thing that I think of is that whether the 76 seasonal sites were included in the website saying, these are the sites we're renting this year, and they only had like 20 seasonals in that particular year, and if that's because they had 50 others that are already rented, it would very cleanly bop it right over 300 again. So,
Right.
you know, that's the problem with these websites. looking through the old website, and I don't know, I have an extraordinarily minor issue, but I read the wrong number when I proposed 300, and the real number should have been 299, as Mr. Doe will notice when he came up with 4991.98 square feet per site.
I figured it had to do with a surveying tolerance.
Yeah, we'll just say more or less, and we're probably fine. I just was, you know, I realized that I just looked at the wrong number when I came up with 300 off the top of my head.
Well, in terms of conflicting evidence, just
Yeah.
to nudge the board a little bit on this, sometimes you don't get a perfect picture, and that's precisely what that's your fact-finding mission, is to say, is it more likely than not that on this issue of historically how many sites there were? Is there a factual finding you can agree on that covers that issue? Even though the evidence isn't perfect, can you do that? Can there be some discussion about that?
Tom, would you speak to that question based on what you just said, which I thought was a good summary of one of the reasons I was comfortable
Yeah.
with saying that there was likely 300, was that there
Well,
was one
At least
plausible
one of the
rationale.
website, you know, I mean, I reviewed the website back to as far back as archive.org kept it. And there were, at least once or twice, it said over 300, just the words, over 300 campsites. And then the other ones all never said that explicitly, but then had these maps. And if you carefully counted the map, you would get 250, 260, 20 of which were seasonals. So once again, that points to since they're not going to advertise stuff they're not going to rent necessarily, that, you know, that they may well have had over 300 if you counted the seasonals that were the guys that stayed there forever.
And if I recall, in those same years, seeing state licenses in the
In the 400s.
400
Right.
and under category.
So
I was
I think
comfortable with it, that's all.
you know, I can see massaging this a little bit, and you two folks working out a good word, even with Nina shaking her head no.
Fudgy.
Scott?
I've got to really look up that archivewebsite.org.
Yeah,
Way back.
it's the Wayback
.org will
Machine,
take you
yeah,
even
here,
farther
several
back.
of them here.
Say it again?
Wayback.org will take you even farther back.
It is hard to tell. I mean, there is a lot of conflicting. I went to the website when this first came, and I counted 286 sites, and it was a colored map in the different areas. I read a memo where, well, I think if I went out there when the snow's gone, is the snow gone? I don't know. And counted, I could tell if there were new ones or which ones have been there for so many years. But I read a memo where there was logging. I mean, that's not my word. It was in the memo that there's logging since the current owners bought it. So I'm not sure what kind of expansion that was in terms of new sites. I don't know, maybe just general clearing, but sure.
Yeah.
Steve Doe from Sebago Technics. When they first purchased it, they did go and do some clearing, and they had to file a logging permit. That's what that was. It wasn't like they were logging it, but it was, there's an application we had to file, the logger had to file with the state, and I think they might have filed it with Warner to cut trees. So that's what the logging thing was.
Thank you.
Did you
my
add any
last thing was-
campsites at that time?
Pardon?
Were any campsites added?
No, we haven't added any campsites.
So no addition or deduction from that clearing?
It was really just to thin out the woods, is really what it was. There was so many trees in there that there was just so much shade that the logging was really to go in there and thin out the woods.
So it was forest management, basically.
Forest management, basically, yes, exactly. So,
Thank you.
okay.
So basically, I think there is a range in my mind. I don't really know. And then part of me is like, I mean, it was their idea. We didn't even request them to go down to 300. They just came sort of out of the blue. What business would eliminate 24 sites from a campground where?
I'm sorry, Mark,
No.
we did
We asked them
suggest that.
We suggested.
I wasn't at that meeting.
That's right. Yep.
That many? 300?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, in fact, that's what Tom's saying now, is that he wished he'd said 299. But yes.
Right, and that was to do.
And again, we said that because it would take that
Right.
nonconformance of that particular
Right.
article
That particular
away.
line item
Gotcha.
would no longer be non-conforming.
And you could do the road that way coming in.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah,
Right.
it had to do with the
Improvements for
impervious.
safety. Right. So I would make the comment that if the current owner, and it looks like he's not made any more or deleted any at this point, but has agreed to reduce, to comply, and is adding safety features, that appears like a good business decision and a safe one for drivers and people going onto the property.
Okay. So we'll work on number 8. It seems like folks are comfortable saying it's that there's a range, or that it might be easiest put that it has, in time or over time, had over 300 sites.
Right.
And,
Yeah, that's for sure.
yeah, whether it was 324 or what have you. But, so keeping, the conflicting evidence and the stuff that was reviewed, but that the board feels comfortable that that Sandy Pines had in excess of 300 campsites.
I think one of the things we could do there is, you only mentioned a couple, maybe one or two pieces of evidence, but maybe we ought to list the evidence, the archival sites, the assessors, and so forth and so on.
That'd be a great
And
idea.
how difficult it was to come to a basis.
That paints a clear picture of how unclear it was.
Yes.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I feel like that's just really gonna muddy the
At that
waters a
level.
lot. There was a lot of anecdotal evidence that we heard There's evidence that, yeah, we've gone on the website and the internet and we've looked at things, but it's not necessarily in the file that we've looked at that I remember. I feel like if we all are around the same general consensus that the number historically exceeded 300, I say we stick with that. And if they're willing to come down, it's showing that the property is becoming more or less non-conforming. And I think that's what's important.
Well, I'm not talking about listing every specific piece of written evidence, just indicating the anecdotal evidence, the evidence from affidavits, the evidence from archival sites, the assessors and so forth.
Okay.
And it's in the public record, and the archival stuff we sent through the mail, so it's part of the record.
So really just generally reference it.
Yeah, just general.
Wait, Nina,
reference,
can you
not
just,
listed.
can you just list that again? I had archival sites, assessors, what were the other types of evidence you just mentioned?
The campground website.
That's
Campground website, yep.
Right, its own,
'Cause-
with the,
yeah, did I miss anything?
no.
Oh, anecdotal
The
affidavits,
affidavits Yeah,
and anecdotal evidence
from public, during the
from,
public hearing.
from public comment.
Yeah,
I might be able to help you with that so that you don't have to go back.
that would be good.
I'm not promising anything, but I'm working in that direction.
Amy, I think the hard part is ensuring that those items are in the record, though. I
Yes.
think we've had a conversation, if I recall, some of these conversations were on a night when the video wasn't working, the sound wasn't working.
Uh-huh.
I'd like to be able to point to a piece of paper in the record if we're going to reference it here.
Yep,
You know, so,
Put together all we have.
I think we can do that.
would you be willing to?
I'll pull up everything that I have.
That'd be great. And then we can take that, put a cover on it and put that in the record and then sort of summarize it in this. That'd be terrific. I like that. You'll see I tried to do that type of thing later with trying to say what the various pieces of the submittal were and all, and
Yes, you did.
I'm hoping I'm going to get some advice later that says that was complete or not, but I tried to be. Tie a ribbon around it.
So prior to conditions, are there any other items?
Well, I mean, we just finished 8, right, so,
Well, we started with eight.
We started at 8.
well, okay. Yeah, we did, we started with, I don't think there's anything wrong with 1 through 7.
So since everyone on the board has read this, does anyone have a comment before 8 on something that they wanted to flag or bring up? I have one. On item 5, Lisa pointed out to me that I had included the wrong date on item 5. I had originally said that the applicant authorized his agent on the 9th of January, 2018, and in fact, he did. There is an authorization letter that's dated the 9th of January, but there is a prior one before the applicant was known as Sandy Pines LLC that authorized their agent. And so I've used the earlier date on here. Is everyone okay with that? Even though there's 2 letters, really?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Anything on 9?
9, yeah, the way it's worded, it says upgrades and improvements, it says most of which have been permitted through planning and code enforcement, and
You think it just should say which have been permitted?
I guess I would say, I would kill most of and then, to make it permitted as required, because, I mean, if there's something they did that didn't require a permit, then saying most of it, they were okay. I mean, that just makes it sound like, hey, we skipped going to the planning board on a few of, or, we didn't bother talking to Werner on a couple of these things, but.
Is everyone okay with that change?
Yes.
Which have been permitted as required.
That's right.
Required, yeah.
That's good. That's a good change.
That's a good change.
We were more or less in compliance is not the,
That's not
Not the
the inference.
message you want to
the-
communicate.
The implication that we wanted to give. On 10, tried to summarize the, so somebody help me out on 10D. How do we know, I mean, I can certainly say per information supplied by the applicant. Do we have anything else? Werner, did you have some site visual that said there were 76? Again, I remember hearing 49 decks were permitted, and I'm not sure what the numbers were, but that we somehow concluded that 76 is the right number for grandfathered seasonal sites. Do you have any?
Yeah, so 76, was a number that was supplied by the applicant. And now, when I went and visited the site at that point in time, everything was cleared from that site. I can, as we've discussed before, there was, now, did I receive 76 phone calls from folks that, were told to have their trailers removed? No. But I certainly received a significant number of calls regarding that whenever trailer owners were asked to vacate. And then you have the previous permitting evidence regarding the decks and sunrooms that were done.
If I were to say that this was per data supplied by the applicant and consistent with not the experience of the code enforcement officer or the...
Yeah. I mean...
Can you help me with crafting a sentence here?
It's not inconsistent with, with what we saw for evidence on aerial photography.
It is
So
consistent.
from information submitted by the applicant, including aerial photography information, which was confirmed by the code enforcement officer, something like that. Is that what?
Yeah,
Is
I
that
think
is
that's
that the
fair.
evidence that
Yeah.
was relied upon? Steve, do you have anything to add to
That's how we
that?
did view it. It was based on aerial photography over, the 80s. And counting the physical campsites at that time.
Reviewed with and confirmed by the code enforcement officer. This is the only venue where you will get to be the CEO. It strikes me every time I write it. So
I have to
it's-
explain that to some people when they ask, what do you do for work? I said, trust me, it's not what you think.
I can see it as salary review time. Why aren't I paid more? Yeah. All right, so I'm going to propose, if you guys are all right with it, to add something like that in lieu of add reference for finding. I'm going to put per data, which included, by the applicant, which included aerial photography review, which was then reviewed by and confirmed, reviewed with and confirmed by the the code enforcement officer. Yep. Anything else on 10? 11? No. 12? $13.
My only question on 13 is not the list, but what happens to that list? Does that set of things actually end up in the registry of deeds so somebody could discover it? Or where does it show up?
I think they're all in the file that's kept by the code enforcement office.
Okay. No problem.
Seem like a complete list?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that is that anyone can go in there and look at the file and pull papers from it, unbeknownst to the secretary and the code enforcement office. With your recorded deed, you can't.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah.
But that's another issue for another day.
I mean, we certainly work hard to make sure that, when the public views the files, that the members of the public are not permitted to take public records out of the office.
Stevie has
My
one.
only comment is on number G. It says site plan drawing. I would probably reference the specific name of that drawing, which was sheet 2 of 9, which I think is called overall site plan, instead of just calling it site plan drawing.
Updated sheet 2 of 9 only, but you're saying refer to it by name as well.
Overall
Yeah.
site plan for
Overall,
Sandy
call it
Pines
the overall
Campground.
site plan drawing instead of just site plan. Because
Thank
there's
you.
numerous other
Ah,
plans in
you're right.
there that are
You're
called
right.
site plans.
It's really sheet 2 is the overall plan.
Correct.
You updated sheet 2 of 9. Just for my,
Yeah.
it's my past training coming home to roost here. Yeah. All right, I'll make that change. So in 14, I mean, I thought a substantial amount of the information that you provided was in a very comprehensive set of site plan drawings, including sheet 2 of 9. And I tried to take what I thought were the salient pieces and be a little more explicit, because it takes a long time to go over those, as I'm sure I'm not telling you anything, on the dining room table.
I have a really silly minor thing,
Please.
but asterisk should be a little lowercase x instead of an asterisk for, you know, yeah, those of us who program
Easy to change.
know what the asterisk is for, but.
It took me a while.
Yeah, but there's like 3 of them that I see.
I'll fix that in each of those places. That's funny. It never
Okay.
jumped at me.
And the very last thing in D, now that I screwed up and we actually have 4991.98 square feet, do we want to still say 5,000 but kind of make it more or less or something, just?
You want to say 5,000 square feet, more or less?
Just say approximately.
Or
5,000.
approximately, or something, because, you know, it's,
I'll say approximately.
that's fine.
You see it all the time. Just do that plus or minus thing. That works.
I'll probably say approximately.
You see it all the time in deeds, that's why,
Oh,
plus or minus. Yeah. More or less works, too.
I use more or less because we used that earlier in the
Okay.
document.
Yeah, more or less is sort of standard.
I think it meets the spirit of it, and it is within the tolerances of the measurements. Unless you're really going to control that grader. So we're good on 14?
Yep.
15, the applicants have requested no submission of performance waivers. All right, so what about on the item 16 then? You want to go through them one by one, or again, let's just maybe hit where there might be issues? A?
It should say 1010A1 and then go to A.
Yeah.
1010A1.
1010A1. Oh, thank you. 1010A.1. Thank you. Anything on A?
No.
On B? What's the next one that someone has an issue with?
Well, you wanted your best management practices.
Yes, and I got a note, you referred to an earlier letter, and I, for some reason,
I submitted a letter. Well, I submitted.
So I did get an email through Lisa today that gave me a list of 3 specific pamphlets.
Correct.
State Department of Environmental Protection, that I will reference.
Correct.
Here.
Yeah, I had submitted that list to Warner and Lisa early last week, and then, yeah, about midweek
Somehow they
last
didn't
week,
get to the
yeah,
board.
okay. But it is
I'm
those
sorry.
3 pamphlets from the Department of Environmental Protection.
Oh, yeah, yes, this is the email that he sent today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Right.
then there should be, the actual letter should be in your folder too. I think the actual.
If you have a
letter-
copy of it, I'd
Yeah,
love
if you
to see it.
want, I can send you a Word version of
It's not in there.
that.
I have that. No, I have this. I don't have the original letter, was all I was saying. I was wondering
I thought Lisa
what else
printed
might be in it.
out or something.
Ed, back to 16, if I could.
I'll get a copy from Warner.
Okay.
That's good. Yeah.
Back to 16A.
Yes, sir.
1010A1A.
Yes.
Under the explanation, the board finds that with the conditions of approval, it doesn't reach an improper expansion. I'm not sure if all the conditions that are at the end of this have to do with an improper expansion.
Right.
So maybe that could be taken out.
Yeah,
The conditions of approval are kind of separate from that. I mean, the conditions of approval are good, but
You're saying it doesn't.
just doesn't
we
go
don't-
there.
We don't need any of the conditions of approval in order to find that it's not an improper expansion?
Not under 1010A1A, whatever it is.
well. One, you can say does not constitute an improper expansion.
So I thought, for example, the first condition, A, that said the total number of campsites
Right.
shall not exceed 300,
Yes.
was a key one to saying that it wasn't an expansion of a non-conforming use.
But do all of them?
No. But I don't think it says all of them. It says as long as you approve the conditions.
So how about the board finds that with some of the conditions of approval? It just kind of implies every condition that we're putting on here.
Are you on the conditions of approval?
We're looking at 16, on page 4, item 16A.
Okay.
Comments. The board finds that with the conditions of approval contained herein, the applicant's proposed project does not constitute an improper expansion. And Mark is suggesting that we should qualify with some of the conditions of approval. And I'm struggling with it.
I'm not understanding why you would just say with some of the condition. I think what is intended here by the language is that you're placing some limitations and restrictions on what the campground can or cannot do. There's been a lot of discussion about those kinds of things, and it's up to you to decide which ones of these are conditions of approval that you should adopt. And so, to make sure that so what is being proposed, you're concluding is not an expansion, but you're also limiting in the future them from, for example, coming back and putting in a 301st
Right.
site.
So all the conditions aren't related to the expansion?
I think in general, saying with the accompanying conditions of
Okay,
approval as
yeah,
a whole,
Yeah,
I think is what the intention
Yeah.
is. I mean, you're right, that you're correct, that not
You might
everyone
argue that
addresses
this one
that
or that one wasn't needed, but I think collectively,
collectively.
we came to the conclusion that in aggregate, these conditions allowed us to find that this was not an
Okay.
increase in the non-conforming use. You want to add the word accompanying?
sure.
Yeah.
Isn't that the same as the word herein later? Sentence?
Yeah.
But anyway.
Okay. Any more on 16? That was good.
Yeah, well, it's connected with the conditions of use. Down in E,
Yep.
the proposed use will not have a significant detrimental effect on the use, and peaceful enjoyment of abutting property as a result of noise, vibrations, fumes, odor, dust, and so forth. I'm thinking about noise, and this is connected to the condition that you've described.
Yep.
The site does advertise bands and movies at night. And I have a problem with that, because bands today are so loud. And noise travels over water so fast and so well that there are abutters around. And there's wildlife like birds and so forth that are affected by that at night. That I think the condition is too lenient. Frankly, I think it should specify when loud noises should stop at night.
So condition K attempts to address that.
Yes.
And are we, first of all, item E doesn't call out that restriction, and maybe it should, that
Yes.
condition. And I can add quiet time. But
The
do
thing.
you want to wait until we talk about the conditions to say, should that be more specific?
Yes.
You want that to be
That's what I want to make. a
9
note of.
PM?
Yeah.
That's it,
yeah.
you know, whatever.
Because I'm struggling with that in terms of.
No, I struggled with writing it, and I didn't know what
Well, we never really
was consistent with
specified.
common
It was
campground
brought up-
practice, so
It was brought up in public hearing,
I
but we never
weasel-worded
really
it.
specified anything.
All right.
And brought it up as a condition.
So let's defer that to talking about item K.
Right.
And at a minimum, we'll add a reference to it on E.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Good idea. What else on 16?
That's all I had.
I think if you're going to place specific conditions in terms of around sound, that it would be helpful, you know, in terms of a practical, you know, understanding of what does that look like. You know, I mean, if you're talking about, you know, an outdoor movie, for example,
That's what
like,
I'm struggling
that's a
with.
little bit easier to quantify.
Yeah,
you know,
because what bothers me is that in the summer, it gets dark so late, and if they put on an outdoor movie, they want to have it later at night. And how loud is that going to be? A band, you can be assured, is going to be very loud, and you want to cut it off at a certain time. But if you cut off a movie at 8:30 or so, you may cut off half the movie.
Or all of it.
All I'm suggesting is that if you're going to go down that road, that you be, you know, a little bit more specific in terms of what that is.
Yes.
I'd prefer not to be getting calls of, I can hear people yelling across the, you know, across the marsh at 10 o'clock at night.
Oh, well, people are going to fight and yell anyway. It's going to be families, so.
That's right. But I think at least, you know, if you're talking about a specific
Activity.
hosted activity or
Yeah.
something that is under the control of the campground, I think that's
Right.
that's one item as opposed to, you know, things that are going to potentially be beyond, you know, be beyond their control.
Well, we could say hosted
Right.
activity.
So-
That would pretty much
Could-
cover it.
Right.
Can I again suggest that we defer this and talk about this as a condition?
Yes.
Because I have several other thoughts on that too. Anything else on 16? Because we're almost at the conditions.
Yeah.
How about 17? The shoreland zone, RP.
There was one in there, again, it's tied to that condition.
Which one is that?
That's D. Will not affect bird or other wildlife habitat. It can very well affect nesting during nesting season.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about the conditions. Russ, you think just go down one by one?
I think we
These are-
should, yeah.
These are important enough?
You want to change pursuit to pursuant?
Oh,
They're both words. They probably didn't come up on spell check.
Spell check, right?
very good.
And now we're at my favorite pet rock. You have a whole mess of wills.
Mine says pursuant.
You want to change them to shells?
That's the way I like it.
That's what we'll do. So the first A, the total number of campsites on the property shall not exceed 300.
Yep.
Correct?
So are all of these conditions previously mentioned above, somewhere in the,
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
should there be a statement that the board has found the following conditions to be important factors in their decision or something like that, since they're not all?
The planning board attaches the following conditions to the approval.
Right,
That's our stock words for that.
okay. Okay.
Yep. Okay with that? B, RVs, trailers, and/or tents shall be removed from all campsites in the flood zone at the end of each camping season, i.e. none of the 76 grandfathered seasonal sites is permitted to be in a flood zone. C, all site work on the property shall be performed under best management practices, and I'll add the 3 referenced documents that,
Or just cross-reference back. Yeah, we have to have the same 3 reference documents twice.
if I can get Word to do that for me, I'll do that, yeah.
A quick question on, sorry to back us
No,
up.
no, not at all.
Up to B. So RVs, trailers, and/or tents shall be removed from all campsites in the flood zone at the end of the camping season. Then we say, for example, none of the 76 grandfathered seasonal sites is permitted to be in the flood zone. Is that
Not,
less-
not e.g., not
Oh,
that, not
sorry.
for example, that
Yes.
is to say.
My bad.
If that's what if we're trying to see.
You think I should just say
the
that?
second half of this sentence, why do we need the first half?
I like it. I'll simplify it. We'll strike the first part.
Should that be are permitted, just a little minor thing?
Sorry.
Are permitted. None are
None
permitted.
is permitted is correct.
Oh,
Okay.
right.
If you're leaving the IE in there, you
No.
wanna,
No,
no,
I'm gonna
okay.
take out the first part of that and just say one sentence. None of the 76 grandfathered seasonal sites is permitted to be in a flood zone.
Okay.
Yeah.
All site work, best management practices, I'll add the reference. Sandy Pines LLC shall use only organic fertilizers and pesticides and shall not use any fertilizers in the shoreland or RP zone areas. Sandy Pines LLC shall use native plants in the landscaping to the extent practical. Sandy Pines shall inspect all septic systems on an annual basis at a minimum. Sandy Pines will maintain and clean the septic systems on a regular basis and provide copies of the inspection/cleaning records to the Code Enforcement Office. Sandy Pines will fund the Healthy Beaches water testing programs in Kennebunkport in the amount of $2,500 per year, as long as that program exists.
How about putting an at least in front of the 2,500?
Sure.
I don't know, they might feel generous one year and give $3,000.
I like it. Nice to be optimistic.
Yeah.
Sandy Pines shall not provide, you must like that one, Tom?
Oh, I love shall not. You
Shall
know
not provide a transportation service for the purpose of shuttling campers to Goose Rocks Beach.
I know, I agree with you.
Okay with that? Sandy Pines shall erect barriers and signage restricting kayak launching to the location provided by the campground for that purpose. Sandy Pines shall erect signage in the entry area asking vehicles awaiting registration to turn off their engines in order to minimize noise, fumes, and odor.
So for sorry,
Yep.
am I being nitpicky and wondering like, so we're asking them to erect barriers restricting kayak launching into a certain location, which would be within close proximity of the water, the shoreline zone, and
It's my maybe Steve could talk to this, that there is an official kayak launch point that the campground
okay.
has. And trying to find a way to word this as to be something that the code enforcement office could actually check. I decided to try to focus on that rather than saying, don't let anyone cross the marsh, which is really the underlying issue.
I'm looking at it from like an extreme, and so they come before us. And
No, I think it's
in a month,
important.
And they say, we'd like to erect a barrier within the shoreline zone.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, really what it is that their property ends right here. You know, this is the edge of the property. This is Rachel Carson, the marsh. And the river's out here.
Yeah.
And there's a channel that was actually cut right into the site.
Yeah.
And at low tide, they can't really launch them there because I think that channel's dry. So what they were doing is they were actually carrying them across the marsh and launching them in the river. And then they got complaints from Rachel Carson, her neighbors. So they've actually put up like basically just a plastic chain, you know, and some signage saying, you know, don't walk on the marsh. And basically you have to launch your kayak at that. There's kind of a depression that goes down to the channel.
Can only launch it where
They can
you're
only
allowed to
them there.
launch it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Conditions permit. So.
Okay, I'm fine.
Any improvement to the wording?
No, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that was that was really the question was, you know, I think we knew what it meant, you know, in terms of, you know, the location,
today.
but it helps to be specific, you know, that really what it was meant is that kayak launching location is at that, where the channel meets the campground property and not just anecdotally giving them permission to trespass across Rachel Carson off through the marsh.
Sure.
Yeah,
Good.
certainly Rachel Carson had some things to say about that.
We did J, now we're up to K, which is, Nina, you were mentioning that you had some concerns about this. I'd be curious to know what is common campground practice?
Well, sometimes, not only dances and bands and so forth, but fireworks, and I would certainly restrict fireworks.
So I want to be careful about staying within our remit here. We're trying to impose conditions such that this is not a non-conforming use, an expansion of a non-conforming use. And there may be some other things that we wish were there.
There's case law, and Amy can speak to this, Frost v. Lucy, where basically the hotel that expanded its use from seasonal to year-round started to add weddings and events and so forth to increase the non-hotel use, and was having, you know, these events go late at night, was restricted. It was considered an expansion of a non-conforming use to have these events. And especially when the noise would have adverse effects on the abutters and so forth. The expansion to a year-round was okay, but they restricted them in terms of the events they could have a cutoff on the noise level and everything. And I think we could make the same condition here, because basically the campground has not had things like wild bands and stuff like that going on. As to my knowledge, there's no evidence of bands being brought in. And today bands are very, very loud, and it will affect nesting. It will affect birds. It will affect abutters because you're close to water and sound travels over water. So the thing I was struggling with, I don't have any problem restricting bands after 8 or 9 o'clock. The thing I was struggling was how do you allow them to have outdoor movies? You know, which is a family sort of thing that a campground could do for
And maybe has done.
For its campers. So.
Okay,
What's common practice?
Yeah, well, I don't know what common practice in all campgrounds is. I know that Sandy Pines has campground regulations, which call for curfew, if you will, or quiet hours, starting at 10 p.m. And while we'd rather not have that as a condition, if the board were to impose a condition, we'd certainly strongly request 10 p.m. because that's what they've done. Just, and certainly Amy can chime in on this, on Frost v. Lucy, as I understand it, the problem was, and the reason it was considered an expansion was, these weren't events just for guests of the hotel. They were bringing what I call outside events in where the public could come in. And we're not bringing the public, you know, we're not going to, well, have a band. They have not had a band there, but we want to have a band and allow members of the public to come in, or host a movie and allow members of the public to come in.
But if you have a band there, it's very likely that your campground, your campers there may invite people in.
I mean,
Friends and neighbors and so forth.
they shouldn't be.
They shouldn't be, but.
And that has to be obviously patrolled and controlled by the
And-
management of the campground.
The circumstances here are different from Frost v. Lucy in that you have a wildlife refuge next door, and you have water where sound travels. And I know this because I live on a river, and I have to listen to those stupid kayakers up and down the river all the time. And sound really travels over water.
Well,
And
again,
I would restrict it to 9 p.m.
we'd request 10 p.m.
I still
mean,
would
it's
go
the
to 9.
summertime, this is family campground,
Sometimes it doesn't get dark till 9.
Right.
yeah.
If you're trying to have a movie, you can't have a movie.
The movies I don't have so much of a problem with unless they turn them so loud, they're like a band. Usually they don't. But bands I do. Fireworks I do.
I mean, I believe there's a sound ordinance in town, is that correct, Warner?
It's, I'm just looking at it now,
Yeah.
it's from 1980.
So here's the question that I'll get. You know, I can predict this. In 3 months it'll be, how about a guy with a guitar next to the pool? You know, is that a band? You know, and those are the types of, you know, issues and questions that ultimately, you know, pop up when, you know, once you have a business that's in operation. It's these, you know, it's the you know, the fringe elements in the gray areas that, you know, that a property owner, you know, that a business owner is trying to figure out how to stay within the confines of a decision, but at the same time, you know, have legitimate questions in terms of what that's supposed to look like.
No, there is a reasonableness requirement to it. When I lived in Westford, I lived across from the Shoba Valley ski area. And during the summer, they set up a tiki bar. And it didn't bother me because my bedroom was on the back side of my house for them. But my neighbors went up in arms. They couldn't sleep. There were people there. They had a live band.
Yeah.
And it invited in a lot of people. And the noise was too much for them, the lights of the headlights of the cars and so forth. And finally, they compromised. They're a good outfit over there, and they compromised, and they stopped the live bands. And they brought it down to a guitar player, you know, acoustic instead of electrified. And everybody was happy, you know, that didn't travel so much.
I think what is clearer is to make, you know, is maybe to make reference to an amplified band.
We were about
Yeah.
to just comment on that.
Yeah,
You know,
okay.
that's clear, you know, I get that.
Yeah.
If the guy shows up with the amp, then that's, you know,
Amplified band or disc jockey? How about that?
it'd be interesting to see what we have in 20 years.
Well, you know,
Might
the,
wanna-
Disc jockey.
Disc jockey.
yeah, the ordinance,
But
I won't know it.
adopted on March 15, 1980, just says it shall be unlawful for any commercial establishment without special permission from the Board of Selectmen to allow electronically amplified sound to be emitted from or outside of their establishments. That's all we have.
Well, that's,
Right?
well, just to give a little bit more background on that, so you're pulling from the special amusement, you know, there's a special amusement license. That's really tied in conjunction to those locations that have a liquor license that's also been, issued by the town.
This is, it just comes up under sound, under ordinances, sound.
Yeah.
Good,
But
'cause
the-
I've looked myself.
But
in
the
past.
license that they go to, that they'll refer to, you know,
Okay.
the approval
Is-
shows up in the special amusement
Gotcha, adopted in
piece of
02.
it. Yep. And that is only tied specifically with those properties that have a liquor license.
Isn't there a separate sound ordinance with decibel levels?
There's a separate, you know, within the land use ordinance, there's a
Yeah.
specific, there are specific guidelines with decibel readings.
I'm a little confused by that. There is, what we're talking though about is, maybe we're not, what, we talking about quiet hours? Or are we talking about, in general, noise?
I think there's a difference between, what's typically understood as quiet hours.
Right.
And, noise from some type of hosted activity or event.
Right.
You know,
We're
and that's
really
where I'm,
talking hosted activity.
right, and that's where I'm referring back to. I mean, typically in a campground, quiet hours is really dealing with, it's dealing with the folks as they're going from campsite to campsite. It's generally understood at that point, you want the kids to be back on the campsite and not, not creating a noise issue. I think, and Ralph can weigh in on that, but that's typically what a quiet hour is.
Or adults having an outside party by the campfire or something.
Right, yeah, we don't want to blame it all on
and
the
making
kids.
noise.
So, because it sounds like you already, K is already satisfied by the rules that they have at the campground as it is. So it could be an L that we're talking about.
Well, I would propose that K be recrafted, than to not be talking about nighttime, but the more general concern about hosted events being loud or having fireworks. Was that the other aspect of it?
Fireworks can be really detrimental to bird life.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, that would be a fire issue with all the
you wouldn't have
trees
any
around
problem with me adding fireworks as part of that limitation, though. Because I mean, Nina makes a compelling point that it's next to a wildlife refuge. There's a fire safety aspect of it, but I think that the.
Well, Miss Shelby used to have it, and the fireworks used to come down on my roof. Then they'd have to run over and look and make sure it wasn't starting a fire.
And they light them off at the beach all summer. Bits and
Yeah,
pieces
they can
here
go
and
to the
there.
beach.
Correct.
There are plenty of places they can go to for fireworks.
So are we suggesting that you can't have ever hosted activities that have electronically amplified music?
No.
Okay.
No, I think it would
I'm
be
being
a
devil's
cutoff.
advocate here.
I think it's a cutoff for the noise at a certain time of night.
for the amplified.
For the amplified. Electronically amplified?
Music.
I don't know.
Now you're
Not into
Being,
music,
I'm
so
being, nor am I, but I'm.
So would it
Just
be
being
no
specific.
electronically amplified sound from hosted activities or events beyond a certain time?
Mhm.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, but would that include movies?
It technically
Electronic.
would.
Yeah, I mean, that.
I think
that
you
to
gotta
me-
start putting a
Other than
dB level
movies?
on it if you're gonna.
Except for
do this.
movies.
Except for quiet movies. I mean,
Except for quiet.
Amplified music, unless you're playing Sound of Music.
that's right, only silent movies.
Right.
Silent movies.
The conditions have to be obviously workable for the
Right.
code officer,
Yeah.
but they also have to be workable for the campground in that
Yeah.
it's not a major imposition.
Understood. And I think it needs to be that if any of us read the criteria, we would each read it and
The same
come to
way.
the same
Yeah.
understanding.
Correct.
So I'm still not clear that we're at that point on this one.
So I'm thinking electrically amplified music speaks to bands that plug in,
Karaoke.
or DJs or karaoke, or it's.
So IE or
don't
EG
even-
for
don't even mention
bands,
music last time.
Don't even mention
karaoke.
movies.
Yeah, no, it's EG now. I
It's
got it.
actually EG, you're right.
Bands, karaoke, what was the other one? DJs
Yeah,
after 9 PM,
yes,
10 PM.
9
We
PM,
prefer 10, but
9 PM.
So you're gonna leave K the way it is, but add.
No.
Add L?
I feel it, I mean,
I'm proposing to remove K.
it's just arbitrary, I think.
And, oh,
How do we get to a time frame? Just
That's what
8
I-
o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, what's.
10 o'clock is existing
what's right,
practice.
What's wrong?
Well, that's what I.
It's typically 9 o'clock. for
Well,
hosted
so
events.
when people go to the town and they host events and they get a permit to have a band at their property, which, as you know, you live on the river. Across the river, there's been events, and we can hear it all the time. So what is the cutoff that they usually get? Because I know that they go till midnight sometimes. So,
I don't know, but I know at the Colony Hotel, it's 9 o'clock.
is that self-imposed?
I think so.
Yeah,
Self-imposed.
yeah, it is.
Because I don't think, I've never been able to find it because I've been a little curmudgeon at times and made a phone call or two, and I was told, well, they've got, the police station said almost till 11, or, like, differing times, so. So I struggle with setting a time when I think across the street at the ice cream shop, they have music there, at least they used to, on a regular basis, and I could hear that from a mile away. I don't know.
I liked 10 only in that it seemed reasonable to me, and it was what's already in effect
Where?
at the campground.
Oh. Well, I'll go with the consensus of the board.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with 10. It's better than 11, which I've been told by the police station a few times, And I'm guessing if there were anything, it'd probably be up closer to the pool or up in that general area too, so.
Hosted activities with electronically amplified music, for example, bands, karaoke, or DJs, not after 10 p.m.
How do you?
Complete.
I
No
think so.
later than 10
I mean, I live
p.m.
right next to, across from Silas Perkins and the park.
Yeah.
And, they'll have, and it's Shakespeare, it's beautiful, but the plays go till like 10:30 and you're like, oh. But, so, I mean, we don't want to limit when we see it happening in Kennebunkport.
Yeah.
But, the permit, it's a great idea too. I say 10. And, they have to permit after that.
It's fair.
That's a good idea.
We good?
I say 9, but I'm not voting.
You're just being a contrarian.
Exactly, as usual.
I do have an L.
An L.
So
Condition.
yes, I was proposing that would be K. Now,
Right, but I do
now
have
you're
an
right,
L.
are there additional conditions? Because I know that at the last meeting, we were concerned that there were a lot of conditions.
Yeah, I don't feel too strongly about it, but giving a nod to the neighbors at the beach and the abutters and such, particularly the beachfront owners, it might be reassuring to them to have the number of 300 verified every year or two, that there hasn't been an expansion. New management gets in there, yeah, let's widen this, let's open up this section of the woods.
I'm not inclined to
No? Okay.
impose on the code enforcement
Okay.
office.
Yeah.
I know those guys are already stretched, and
Okay.
it looks to me, at least in this case, that we've got an applicant that's acting in good faith. Now, maybe that's a minority opinion, but it's my
So
opinion.
far.
I suspect if we ban improperly.
Somebody might notice.
notify the
Oh, yeah.
I expect there'll be guests that will wander the site from time to time.
I have a couple of
At these
housekeeping.
hosted events?
Not after 10, they won't be wondering. I have a couple housekeeping potential conditions for the board to consider.
Please.
One of them is probably not controversial, but I think everyone has agreed this is a seasonal campground. I don't know if there was any discussion about, I mean, it's within the body of the findings that it is a grandfathered seasonal campground.
And we say
Has there been
it
discussion as
remains.
to what the season constitutes? And
The
does the board
website-
wish to establish that, or just say the condition of approval is that this remains a seasonal campground. It
Well,
does say that already, so it may be.
I'm not up to going back and looking through the websites to
Mm-hmm.
find out when they started camping and stuff like that. I know the ending is Columbus Day weekend of that season, according to the site, but I don't know when the beginning is. But we could basically indicate what the season is. It wouldn't take very much to do that.
So
What-
if you,
Go
if you
ahead.
look at the definition within the ordinance that defines seasonal use as occupancy or use for 180 continuous days or less, but generally between April 15th and October 15th of each year.
So it's already defined.
Yeah.
That's defined.
That's defined.
Remember that this is,
You're talking about specifying.
that's
it as a
defined in the
condition.
ordinance today, but the question is, historically, since this is a legally non-conforming campground use, do you want the season to be more related to what historically has been the season on the campground, as long as it complies with the definition?
Well, that's what I said, I don't want to go back and look at that after we've had to go back and look at bases. I'd
Okay.
rather define it as it is in the land use ordinance today, and then just specify which is, April 15th to October 15th.
So would the board care to add a condition that just says the campground must remain seasonal? Or this must remain a seasonal campground, or?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Okay. The second item that I wasn't sure if this was discussed or not, but it is discussed in the findings, and I think you might want to have some discussion about it, but there's reference to historically there being 76, quote, seasonal sites on the property. By seasonal sites, I think the board understands that the RVs or the vehicles that are going to be on those sites are going to be allowed to remain there year-round, but not occupied year-round.
Yeah.
So I think if that's consistent with the board's understanding and belief that and if 76 is the number, since it's in the findings, that a reasonable condition of approval would be to limit the seasonal sites to 76. And what is meant by a seasonal site is blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. That sounds good.
That sounds,
Yes.
I would
Ed's
agree
taking
with
nice notes.
And then, this was perhaps not discussed by the board, but there was a discussion, I think, at previous meetings that Ralph and his team did have discussions with Werner, and Werner and I discussed what they had proposed before, that Werner and I decided we didn't feel, we felt it would be an improper expansion, and they decided not to bring those items forward to the board. So you haven't seen them to review them. The question is, do you want to, we can talk about what those things were, and do we want to be clear that those things are not to be allowed? In other words, impose conditions of approval on the second pool, for example, or the bar that was supposed to be added to the pool, or the pavilion that was 24 by 40 feet that was going to be enclosed.
Well, those
I think we
things
should
were-
know that.
Well, the problem is it's not in the record.
Yeah, it wasn't brought before us ever.
And I don't want to give
Okay.
I don't want to imply that if I do add those conditions, that that's an exhaustive list.
Yeah.
I mean,
Because
if we
it's
want to
not.
add
These are just the
something,
things we thought of.
we'll go to the code officer. He'll either say he can permit it, or it has to go to the planning board, and he or a town attorney will give their opinion as to whether that should be allowed or not.
I agree,
So it goes back through.
yeah. Because those things were
Because
never.
you didn't discuss those.
Right, they
I
were never
understand.
brought before us.
I know Ralph made a comment about them, but this list never went into the record.
no.
So,
No, during the public hearing, some of the people brought up they want to do this, they want to do that, but it's never been
Yeah.
brought before the board. So I don't think we should
But
address
it
I
would
agree.
have to be
I agree.
for the board to happen.
That wasn't clear to me. Okay, that's all I had. Did you have anything else?
No.
So are we then proposing that with an input from Nina, I'll update this draft, I'll distribute it, again, not for comment, but to be reviewed and possibly approved at the next meeting?
I would say, this is related to that, when we complete findings of fact and we circulate, I was chatting with Lisa today at the office, and sometimes, I've printed my own in the past, and Lisa has brought some forward and she's correct things for me. And I've read through mine and scratched out things, and we've passed around and had to initial a bunch of times over. So it might be a good practice to, like, when it comes time to present and read, that she'll never change context or content, but she'll sometimes fix a date or add a letter
Formatting.
or format. So related to that, yes, please share and
But maybe I could share it by sending it to Lisa and asking her to share it?
yeah, or copy her, but like, just make sure there's constant, like, you should make sure that when you feel like it's done,
Yes.
make sure that she has a copy that she can proof and print and double check.
Absolutely.
It's a practical issue just in terms of formatting and, you know, if there's any, you know, inadvertent typos. You know,
Oh, I love
get
that
picked up.
idea. What I don't, what I would like to avoid is me sending out a copy to everybody and then it being different from the copy that they get when they come to the meeting. Because
Well, they don't
Lisa
get a copy when they come
corrected
to the
something.
meeting.
You did tonight, didn't you?
I got a copy of my stuff tonight.
Well, because of what we're doing tonight,
That was, oh, I see,
Right.
the exception.
but typically,
Okay.
it would be something that 2 copies would come, Werner would give them to the case manager, who
Right.
would then read.
Oh, that's fine then.
Can I
Thank you.
add one more housekeeping thing? Just, I don't want to interrupt this, but just before you're done. Because I took the liberty of trying to capture the discussion and specifically Nina's points about evidence on the number of sites. So that doesn't go around in circles endlessly before you come back again. I'm going to read it to you and see if there is a consensus. If there's not, then you can go
And
back.
if there is, then you would share it with me.
Yeah, and then
I could grab it.
But if the board can reach a consensus on that tonight, I think it will just solidify things, and
Okay.
then it leaves less work for the two of you, hopefully.
All right.
All right, so number 8, it would say, although conflicting evidence was reviewed regarding the number of campsites historically on the property, and I'm going to add a parenthetical there that says, which included evidence that the number of sites may have ranged from 225 to in excess of 400. That's what I heard. You can tweak those numbers, or talk about that. The board concludes that there is substantial evidence in the record that the current number of campsites is 324, and that the number of campsites historically on the property since the mid-'80s, on the whole, has exceeded 300. This conclusion is based on a variety of evidence, including from the campground websites and advertisements, the affidavit of Stephen Doe dated March 12, 2018, anecdotal evidence from public comment, archival sites, and assessor's records. Does that more or less, and the rest stays the same, but does that more or less capture what you were trying to get at?
Yes.
Okay, so then we don't have to go around
Okay.
multiple times on that,
Email
and
that to me?
I will
Thank you.
get that to you. Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much. That's really helpful.
Saves you at least a couple days.
Yes, hopefully.
Not to mention time at the next meeting when we all,
I was gonna joke and
That isn't-
ask.
that isn't how I
is 2
recall
weeks-
this.
Is 2 weeks enough for you?
No, I won't be able to remember.
thank you. Uh-oh.
I just got just a question. So at the next meeting, would the board be voting on it and reading the findings of fact? The reason I ask is because our window of opportunity to complete these improvements is very narrow, and if we had it approved on the 18th, they would at least be able to start some of the improvements, at least, get the lanes in to you know, just trying to make this next season
Yeah.
safer. There's certain things they won't be able to complete, but at least if they can get the lane in, and they can kind of work in the background in like in the fall on completing some of the other improvements, so
Sure.
that's all I ask.
I was going to ask the board if it, and this is trying to figure out where we are, if it would be premature to vote, as we have in the past, whether or not to approve, and then read the findings of fact at our next meeting.
I'd be comfortable with that.
Yeah.
I think we pretty much covered and understand all the issues and where we.
I think we're going to hear from our attorney here.
Yeah.
I'm less comfortable with that.
Huh?
I mean, with apologies to Steve and your crew, and I think Ralph would, you don't have to weigh in, Ralph, but I think it would be cleaner if you did both on the same night.
Okay.
Okay.
Vote and adopt a written decision.
As long as it's voted on at the next meeting and the findings, if approved and signed, that meeting, not another 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Right. I would prefer you do it all together if you can.
You're the expert.
Now,
I'm just.
do you mean for this case or all cases?
No, well, for this case in particular, I mean, I know every case is a little bit different, but given the number of meetings and the issues involved, I think procedurally we should be squeaky clean on this one, if we can.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, but I felt comfortable tonight. So this would then be, am I being too technical? This isn't a continued deliberation, it's just a continuation? Yeah. Okay, so we will continue, I guess I'll make a motion to continue the Sandy Pines Campground, case 171201 to our next meeting on April the 18th.
2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, where we will have an amended findings of fact and discuss for vote, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my motion.
Just
Second, Trish?
just to be clear for the creation of the next agenda, I heard continued deliberations, but I also heard findings.
Well, yeah, I
So
said,
just-
I don't believe this is a continued
Okay.
deliberation. This is a continuation.
Thank you.
Okay. So, motion to continue.
May I just ask a clarifying question? I know Mr. Austin requested it, but I was pleased to be able to have the code enforcement officer share a copy of the preliminary draft with him. It was helpful. It wasn't, there was no back and forth on it, so I think it was all in keeping with our sunshine laws. But is that type of thing useful again this time, or are we saying revert back to normal practice of coming back to the board?
I'm okay with you sharing it again.
We do it the same way, Werner, you would share a copy with the applicant?
Yeah, as
Of
long
the
as
draft.
As long as the board doesn't have any issues with that.
I don't, but I wanted to make sure everyone was okay with that.
If you're going to give it to the applicant, why don't you put draft on it?
I will.
Sure,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So I'll
Second.
make the motion to continue this to the next meeting. Second, all those in favor? Opposed? Okay.
Well, you're saying more than just the title of it, the draft?
Make a motion to adjourn?
I didn't know what it is.
When you do line that out?
Oh, yeah,
The two copies that Lisa wants
So,
signed?
why don't you ask her?
Oh, right.
Amy, before you pack
Amy,
up.
before you leave, and this is not related to, we're done with Sandy Pines.
Kicking us out.
No, it's somewhat
You can hang
related
out
to
till
you,
10.
but anyway, we're in receipt of a letter on the subject of Pinnacle Hill 2 from Scott Edmonds, and I guess we'd like your take on said letter. It's relative to this Pinnacle Hill 2 development.
That'll be made during that agenda. I don't need to weigh in on the letter that Scott Edmonds.
I haven't seen any.
No,
Oh, you don't have to hear.
We're just asking you to take a look at
Oh,
it
you
and
are,
get back
okay.
to us.
There, yeah. So Werner can share a copy, or,
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, it's regarding Pinnacle Hill 2, and it's from, I think, a concerned Bergen Parkinson representing a concerned citizen and compelling the board to do certain things, or, so would love to hear your opinion on that. Yes, we figured as much.
We figured we'd hear yours.
Okay, so thank you, thank
Okay.
you. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? All right.
I have a question.